There's something uniquely telling about the way a person struggles to let go. Emotional detachment is not merely about moving on or forgetting. It's about psychological reorientation. And for some people, that becomes nearly impossible when it comes to a particular person. Not everyone knows how to close the emotional door, even when the relationship no longer serves them, even when the connection becomes painful. And when someone can't emotionally detach from you, what begins to surface isn't always direct. It doesn't always come in the form of words like "I miss you" or "I can't let go." No, emotional attachment runs deeper than that. It leaks through their behavior. It appears in the details, in their silence, their reactions, their rituals, and their inability to re-anchor themselves elsewhere. This isn't about sentimentality. It's about psychological dependence masked as love, or perhaps genuine love sabotaged by fear. The inability to emotionally detach speaks to a person's internal structure, how they process pain, how they define identity through connection, and how unresolved emotional needs latch onto people rather than principles. You may think they've moved on. You may even hear them say the right things, words of closure, maturity, resolution, but look closer. Watch their behavior. Listen between the lines. Because if someone cannot detach from you, 5 distinct signs will almost always make themselves known. They can't hide them for long. Because when a bond is unbroken on one side, the signs rise to the surface like pressure under the skin. And if you understand what these signs are, you'll no longer be confused about where you stand in their world. They don't plan it. They don't even want it necessarily. But when someone can't emotionally detach from you, the echoes of your presence resound in their mind long after you've left the room. These echoes aren't poetic. They're intrusive. You appear in their thoughts without invitation. Your voice runs in the background of their day-to-day life, not as a memory they deliberately access, but as a phantom presence that refuses to release them. This is the first and clearest sign. Emotional echoes that persist and override reason. You may not see it at first. On the surface, they may look composed, distracted by work, friendships, or superficial distractions. But that's the trick. Detachment doesn't fail because of what a person does on the outside. It fails because the inside refuses to update the emotional narrative. The bond they once felt with you hasn't been rewritten, hasn't been resolved or laid to rest. Instead, it loops, not because they're weak, but because you symbolize something they haven't yet been able to replace or reconstruct. It's not about the facts, it's about what you meant, and that meaning is still alive inside of them. This is why your name brings a reaction, not a casual one, a charged one. The sound of it pulls something from deep inside them that they can't quite. They may not speak of you anymore, but their nervous system does. Their mood may shift when your name is mentioned. Their eyes might flicker when they hear a song or phrase tied to a memory of you. You exist as an emotional reference point, and everything they experience is measured against the intensity of what they once felt with you. This is the psychological residue of a connection that has not been emotionally metabolized. And the truth is, many people don't know how to digest emotional intensity. They absorb it, they drown in it, they don't release it, they relive it. And the mind, wired for patterns, keeps returning to that which was once meaningful, even if that meaning has become corrosive. They may wonder why they can't stop thinking about you, why their thoughts circle around you like vultures around an idea that won't die. And it's not because they choose to. It's because you live in the part of their psyche that hasn't healed. And until healing takes place, your image becomes a symbol of both comfort and torment. It's also important to understand that these emotional echoes distort time. Someone who can't detach from you often becomes trapped in the psychological present of your shared past. Even if months or years have passed, Their emotional response to you hasn't aged. It hasn't matured. You exist in them as a living presence, not as a historical event. This creates cognitive dissonance. They know they shouldn't care. They know they shouldn't feel, but they do. And that internal split between logic and emotion becomes a battleground. They may even resent you for it. Not because of something you're doing now, but because of the control your memory still exerts over them. In that sense, you become both the source of longing and the object of frustration. They may try to substitute you. Try to find someone else who looks like you, talks like you, laughs like you, just to trick the mind into believing they've moved on. But the shadow comparison betrays the truth. Every new interaction is filtered through the lens of your former connection. They search for the same rhythm, the same depth, the same emotional pull. And when they don't find it, they return to you in their thoughts, not because you were perfect, but because the emotional intensity tied to you remains unmatched. This is also why they may reach out unexpectedly. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's a vague message, a comment on social media, a question that doesn't need an answer. These moments aren't always about reconnection. They're about validation. They want to know if the echo goes both ways, if you still feel it, if the emotional thread is still alive on your end too. And when you ignore it or respond with coldness, it deepens their internal conflict. It reactivates the wound. But when you respond with familiarity, it reignites their hope, even if nothing has changed. Emotional echoes are not memories. They are symptoms. They are what happens when the psyche refuses to relinquish its attachment. And people often confuse this for love, but it's not always love. Sometimes it's the absence of closure. Sometimes it's fear disguised as connection. The fear of starting over, of losing meaning, of having to redefine the self without the emotional scaffolding you once provided. That fear is powerful. It overrides rational decision making. It keeps people tethered to someone they no longer have, because letting go would mean facing the emptiness they've been avoiding. You see, emotional detachment requires more than time. It requires psychological integration. It demands that a person face their own need for significance and accept that the meaning they found in you must now be created from within. That's hard. That's brutal. And most people don't know how to do it. So they dwell, they obsess, they replay. And every time they do, you grow stronger in their emotional system, not weaker. This is why when someone can't emotionally detach from you, their thoughts betray them. You live in the pauses between their actions, in the gaps between their words. You exist in their emotional framework like a ghost they're both trying to exercise and keep alive. And no matter what they tell themselves, no matter what image they present to the world, the mind, the nervous system doesn't fake its responses. And if you could peer inside their private world, their quiet moments, their internal dialogues, you'd see it clearly. They haven't let you go. You're still with them, not in flesh, not in fact, but in feeling. And until they confront that emotional residue, until they choose healing over longing, you will continue to echo within them, loud, persistent, and unavoidable. When someone can't emotionally detach from you, one of the most revealing signs is how their boundaries begin to collapse in your presence. At first it may look like affection, like care, like devotion. But it's deeper than that. It's a quiet dismantling of their inner guardrails. You become the exception to their standards. The rules they once had for how others treat them begin to bend, then break, and finally disappear when it comes to you. And that isn't love. It's emotional enmeshment disguised as closeness. They don't say no to you even when they should. They tolerate more than they ever would with anyone else. You'll see it in the way they accommodate you, even when it hurts them. They might stay longer in conversations that exhaust them, agree to situations that make them uncomfortable, give in to dynamics that violate their values, not because they're weak, but because their sense of self begins to dissolve in the gravity of your presence. You have become their emotional compass, and they begin navigating life by your reactions, your moods, your needs, sacrificing their own in the process. This isn't about kindness. This is about self-abandonment. There's a difference between giving and giving yourself away. And someone who can't detach from you often begins to do the latter. They don't assert themselves. They shrink. They mold their preferences around yours. You can feel their emotional pliability when they're with you. You sense that they're not standing on solid ground. Every decision becomes filtered through a single question: will this keep me close to you? Even when there's conflict, when you hurt them, when you pull away, when your actions contradict your words, they still return. They still find a reason to justify staying emotionally engaged. That's how you know the attachment has overridden their internal boundaries. They might tell themselves stories about why you acted the way you did, soften the edges of your behavior, and rationalize your detachment, because admitting the truth would shatter the illusion their emotions are clinging to. And that illusion, for them, is safer than the emotional freefall of letting you go. They're not doing this consciously. That's what makes it tragic. They often don't see how much of themselves they're losing in the process. It begins small, choosing your favorite restaurant instead of theirs, staying up late to talk when they're exhausted, saying yes when they want to say no. But over time, these small self-betrayals accumulate, and eventually, they forget what their own boundaries even looked like before you entered the picture. People who can't detach, or often call this connection. But connection without individuality is dependency. When someone erases their boundaries for the sake of staying close to you, they're not deepening the relationship. They're hollowing themselves out. What they're giving you is not presence, it's submission. And while you may not ask for it, the emotional dynamic begins to feed on it. The more they disappear into you, the more the imbalance grows. And eventually, you no longer relate to them, you rule over them, not with intention, but with emotional power, because they've given you authority over their internal world. This collapse of boundaries also shows up in their silence. You'll notice the things they don't say, the resentment they swallow, the discomfort they hide. They stop expressing negative emotions, not because they've disappeared, but because they fear those emotions will push you away. So they internalize them. They turn their anger inward. And over time, this self-suppression turns into anxiety, self-doubt, and quiet despair. They start to question their worth, not because you said they weren't enough, but because they keep showing up for someone who doesn't show up equally in return. And that imbalance chips away at their dignity. One compromise at a time. You might wonder why they don't just walk away, why they don't reclaim their power. The answer lies in the emotional meaning they've placed on you. You've become a symbol, not just a person. A symbol of connection, of significance, of identity. Letting go of you would mean losing the emotional scaffolding they've built around their need for validation. And for someone who hasn't yet learned how to stand fully in their own worth, that's a terrifying thought. So they stay. They comply. They soften their edges. Not because they don't feel the pain, but because the pain of losing you feels greater. And yet, their boundaries aren't truly gone. They're just buried. You'll see them surface in moments of contradiction, in flashes of anger, in sudden withdrawals followed by guilt. Their soul is trying to fight for itself, even while their emotions keep them tethered to you. It's a war between their need for self-respect and their fear of emotional loss. And as long as they can't detach, that war rages silently inside of them. Sometimes people around them notice before they do. Friends say they've changed. that they're less vibrant, less assertive, that they seem lost, like a shadow of who they used to be. And that's because they are. Emotional attachment, when not grounded in mutual respect and autonomy, becomes a slow erasure. They haven't just attached to you, they've merged with you. And now, without you, they don't know where they end and you begin. But the truth is, no matter how close two people are, no matter how deep the bond, boundaries are essential. They protect identity. They protect integrity. Without them, love becomes servitude. And what started as connection becomes emotional captivity. So, when someone can't detach from you and you see their boundaries dissolve in your presence, understand what that means. It's not just a sign of how much they care. It's a sign of how much of themselves they're willing to sacrifice to stay emotionally connected to you. That's not romantic. That's a tragedy in slow motion. They don't need more of you. They need more of themselves. But they won't find that until they're willing to face the discomfort of detachment, because only in that discomfort can they begin the process of rebuilding their boundaries, not as a wall against connection, but as a foundation for real, healthy love, the kind that doesn't ask them to disappear, but demands that they stand fully in who they are, even when you're gone. When someone can't emotionally detach from you, their reactions to even the smallest shifts in your attention become exaggerated. This is not a matter of sensitivity in the ordinary sense. This is the nervous system responding to your presence, or more accurately, to your absence. If you distance yourself even slightly, if your responses slow down, if your tone changes, or if you fail to show the same warmth you once did, their reaction is not it is not calm. It is not processed with equanimity. It is intense, disproportionate, and sometimes even irrational. That's because to them, emotional detachment from you feels like abandonment. And the emotional system interprets abandonment as a threat to psychological survival. They may not show this openly, they may not cry, plead, or beg, but you'll feel the shift. You'll sense the tension rise. Their behavior will become erratic, sometimes cold, sometimes clingy, sometimes angry, without explanation. This inconsistency is the internal chaos leaking out, because their internal stability was never fully theirs. It was tied to your approval, your attention, your validation, and the moment you step back, even a little, their emotional floor begins to crack. They interpret your withdrawal as rejection, even if that's not your intent. You may just be busy, you may just be tired, you may just be in a different emotional space that day, but they don't process it through a lens of logic, they process it through the lens of fear. And fear doesn't ask questions, it makes assumptions. Fear convinces them that you're leaving even when you're not, that they've done something wrong even when they haven't, that the connection is being erased even when it's only being recalibrated. And this is why they become hypersensitive to your behavior. They study your text messages like emotional maps, dissecting punctuation, timing, word choice. They replay your conversations in their minds, looking for signs. Was that indifference? Was that disinterest? Did you seem distant? Their mind becomes a radar, constantly scanning for danger. And in that state, everything you do becomes data they overanalyze. They cannot rest in ambiguity. They cannot trust the space between interactions. That space, to them, feels like abandonment. You'll notice how quickly their emotional state fluctuates based on your engagement. If you give them warmth, they light up. If you grow distant, they darken. Their mood becomes contingent on your presence, which means they no longer own their inner world. You do. And this is where things become difficult, not just for them, but for you. Because they may start to demand more from you than you are willing or even able to give. Not in the form of explicit requests, but in subtle expectations. You'll feel it in their disappointment. You'll feel it in their quiet resentment. You'll feel it in how much they begin to rely on your responses to feel secure. This kind of emotional dependency doesn't ask whether the connection is healthy, it only asks whether it still exists, even if it's harmful, even if it's one-sided, even if it's draining. The pain of uncertainty for them feels worse than the pain of imbalance. So they hold on, they overcompensate, they begin to strategize emotionally, doing things not from authenticity, but from fear of loss. They try harder, become more agreeable, try to please you even more. But underneath it all, the motive is not love, it's survival. When you don't give them what they need, constant reassurance, presence, emotional warmth, they may retaliate, not always directly, but passively. They may withdraw just to see if you'll chase. They may post things that seem aimed at you, say things that sting, or behave in ways that are clearly designed to provoke a reaction. This is the nervous system fighting to regain emotional equilibrium. They don't necessarily want to hurt you. They want to feel something from you, anything, even if it's anger, because anger is still engagement. And in their mind, that's better than silence. These disproportionate reactions are not always dramatic on the surface, but they are intense internally. They feel anxiety when you don't respond quickly. They feel panic when your tone is flat. They feel despair when you forget something important. And while none of those things may have been done with intention to harm, they are magnified through the lens of emotional dependence. They've lost their ability to regulate their own feelings where you're concerned. Your presence has become a drug, and your withdrawal triggers a form of emotional withdrawal they can't easily manage. In some cases, they might start to sabotage the connection unconsciously. The fear of losing you becomes so overwhelming that they push you away before you can pull away. They create conflict, they test your loyalty, they accuse you of things, not because they believe them, but because they need to feel in control of the impending loss. This is emotional preemptiveness. If they believe they're going to be abandoned, they want to beat you to it. Not because they want to end it, but because they can't bear to feel powerless. These reactions are often confused with intensity or passion, but it's not passion, it's pain. It's the inability to hold space for their own emotional life without needing constant affirmation from you. And it's not sustainable. Because eventually the weight of that expectation will crush the connection. You will begin to feel responsible for their emotional well-being, and that is not love. That is emotional burden, and over time you'll resent them for it, even if you don't want to. But for them, the emotional bond has already been tied into their sense of worth. They aren't just afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing the version of themselves that exists when they are with you. That's why your withdrawal feels so devastating. It's not just about missing you. It's about feeling like they disappear when you're not there. And until they reclaim their sense of self, until they learn how to soothe their nervous system in your absence, until they find peace without needing your constant validation, they will continue to react in ways that seem irrational but are deeply human. This is how you know someone can't emotionally detach. Your distance doesn't give them space. It gives them panic. And until they begin to face those reactions, to trace them back to their origin and begin healing the part of them that equates love with emotional dependency, they will remain stuck in the pattern, caught in a loop of fear, reaction, and the desperate need to feel safe in a bond they never truly trusted to begin with. When someone can't emotionally detach from you, they often create elaborate internal narratives to maintain the emotional tie, even in your absence. It's not simply that they miss you, it's that they begin to imagine versions of you, stories about you, hypothetical scenarios involving you. These imagined connections serve as emotional placeholders, filling the void with fantasy because reality has become too painful. They rehearse conversations in their mind They play out what they would say if they saw you again. They imagine what you're doing, how you're feeling, whether you're thinking about them. And in that mental theater, you're still present, even if in real life you're long gone. This is not delusion in the clinical sense. It's emotional survival. The mind, in its effort to preserve attachment, generates meaning where there is silence. It interprets absence as mystery, and mystery becomes a playground for projection. They might tell themselves you're just busy, that you still care, that you're afraid that you'll come back. They reinterpret your distance as strategy, not as detachment. Because believing you've let go would be too confronting. It would mean facing the truth that the connection might not be mutual anymore. And that level of grief is something they're not yet willing to face. So they stay emotionally connected through imagination. They attach to what could have been. They replay the good moments, even if those moments were fleeting. They magnify the significance of small gestures, a smile, a compliment, a moment of closeness, until those fragments become the foundation of a story they don't want to let go of. That story isn't just about you. It's about who they believe they were when they were with you. And sometimes that version of themselves felt more alive, more seen, more hopeful than the version they face now. That's the real danger. The emotional tie persists, not because of who you are, but because of what you represented. You became a symbol of love or redemption or escape. And when a person starts attaching to a symbol rather than a real relationship, they no longer interact with you, they interact with their idea of you. You can tell because their expectations no longer match your behavior. They expect connection without contact. They expect loyalty without commitment. They expect emotional reciprocity without engagement. Because in their inner world, the connection still exists. This is also why they resist closure. Closure would mean ending the story. It would mean deleting the fantasy. And that feels like erasing something sacred, even if you've moved on. Even if you've made your position clear, they still find ways to keep the door open emotionally. They keep a photograph. They revisit old messages. They hold on to keepsakes. Not just because of sentimental value, but because those objects serve as proof that what they felt was real. And if it was real, then maybe, just maybe, it still means something. You'll see it in the way they talk about you. Even to others. They speak as though the bond is still alive. They speak in present tense, not past. They hold on to your name like it still belongs in their story. And when they hear your name from someone else, you can see the shift in their body. The attention sharpens, the energy rises. Because emotionally, they're still in orbit around you, even if your planet no longer exists in the same solar system. This form of emotional entanglement is difficult to break because it isn't rooted in logic. It's rooted in memory and longing, in the parts of the psyche that crave resolution but never received it. And the mind hates open loops, so it tries to close them with imagination. That's why they fantasize about reunions, about apologies, about reconciliations. These fantasies aren't hopeful, they're protective. They allow the nervous system to stay calm. Because if they truly faced the finality of the separation, they would have to confront the grief they've been avoiding. And yet, this avoidance has a cost. The more time they spend in a mental relationship, the less present they become in real life. Opportunities for new connections are ignored or sabotaged. They compare everyone to you. No one measures up, not because you were perfect, but because no one else is competing with reality. They're competing with a fantasy. And fantasies always win because they can be shaped, edited, and perfected. Real people can't do that. Real relationships come with complexity, conflict, and imperfection. But a fantasy relationship, it gives them control. And when someone feels emotionally powerless, control, even imaginary control, feels like safety. In time, their identity becomes partially built around their connection to you. They describe themselves in relation to you. I was the one who loved deeply. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who saw the truth. That identity is hard to release because it comes with meaning. Letting you go would mean letting go of the story they've told themselves about who they were with you. And without that story, they may feel hollow, uncertain, or irrelevant. The irony is that this emotional holding on is often invisible to the outside world. They may appear fine. They may be functioning. They may even be dating someone new. But emotionally, they're still tethered to a version of the past that no longer exists. And unless they face it, unless they grieve not just your absence, but the idea of you they've kept alive, they will stay stuck, endlessly looping through a chapter that has already ended. What they truly need is not a message from you, or a second chance, or a sign. What they need is the courage to step out of the narrative and confront the silence as it is, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a reality to accept. They need to stop asking why and start saying goodbye. Not just to you, but to the imagined life that kept them emotionally safe. Because real healing doesn't happen in memory, it happens in presence. And that presence begins the moment they decide to live in reality again, even if it hurts, even if it's empty, even if it means rebuilding without the story they once clung to so tightly.